23. The appraisal comes in low. What happens to the deal now? Sarah is sitting at her desk Friday afternoon when Daniel calls. The inspection issues have finally been resolved. The Reynolds are completing the agreed repairs, and Sarah is starting to believe the transaction has settled down. Then Daniel says, "We got the appraisal." Sarah immediately asks, "How did it come in?" $605,000. Sarah looks at the contract. Purchase price, $615,000. There's a $10,000 difference. 5 minutes later, Sarah is on the phone with Mike and Jennifer. Mike's reaction is exactly what you would expect. "That's ridiculous. David already agreed to pay $615,000. Tell the appraiser he's wrong." Here comes another important distinction. The contract price and appraised value are not the same thing. The $615,000 contract price represents the amount Mike, Jennifer, and David agreed upon in their purchase contract. The $605,000 appraisal is a valuation conclusion prepared as part of a separate appraisal assignment. The appraisal does not simply reach into the purchase contract and replace $615,000 with $605,000, but that doesn't mean it can be ignored. David is obtaining financing. His lender is evaluating the property as collateral for the loan, and the appraisal may affect that financing. Mike says, "But David agreed to $615,000. Doesn't he have to pay it?" Sarah should not answer that question from memory. She needs to review the actual financing and appraisal provisions of the purchase contract and understand what contractual rights and obligations apply. This is where agents sometimes get themselves into trouble. They immediately tell the seller, "Don't worry, the buyer has to bring the extra $10,000. Maybe, maybe not. Read the contract. The same caution applies to Daniel. He shouldn't automatically announce, "The appraisal is low, so the seller has to reduce the price." An appraisal isn't automatically a price reduction notice. The parties need to evaluate the appraisal, financing requirements, contract provisions, and their available options. Mike asks Sarah, "What can we do?" There may be several possible paths, depending upon the transaction. The Reynolds could agree to reduce the purchase price. David could potentially contribute additional funds if permitted, financially feasible, and consistent with the transaction. The parties might negotiate somewhere between the two numbers. The appraisal may be reviewed through the lender's appropriate process if there is relevant additional information or a potential factual issue. Or the transaction could face cancellation if the parties cannot resolve the financing and appraisal issues under the contract. Notice that I said may. Sarah shouldn't turn possible solutions into guaranteed contractual rights without reviewing the agreement. Mike is still focused on the appraiser. "Give me his number, I'm calling him." Sarah slows him down. Federal appraisal independence requirements are designed to protect the valuation process from improper pressure and coercion. Sarah should not call an appraiser and say, "You need to change this appraisal to $615,000 or you're going to kill my transaction." That's exactly the wrong approach. But appraisal independence doesn't mean relevant factual information can never be communicated through appropriate channels. Suppose the appraisal incorrectly states that the Reynolds home has a 2-car garage when it actually has 3. That's factual information. Suppose Sarah knows about a relevant closed sale that may not have been considered. That may be worth identifying through the appropriate process. Suppose the appraisal says the property has never been remodeled, but Sarah has documentation showing substantial improvements. Again, relevant factual information may matter. The goal should be accuracy, not forcing a predetermined number. That's why I give agents this broker tip. Fight for accurate information, not a predetermined value. Sarah asks Daniel whether David's lender has a process for addressing appraisal concerns. Daniel contacts the lender and learns that information may be submitted for a reconsideration of value, commonly called an ROV. Sarah reviews the appraisal information available to her and compares it with her market data. This is where Chapter 3 comes back. Remember Jennifer's favorite $640,000 comparable? Sarah can't simply submit it because it has the highest sales price. She needs to consider whether it is actually relevant. That property was larger, had a 3-car garage, a pool, and a different lot characteristic. A reconsideration request shouldn't be a collection of the highest sales Sarah can find. Sarah identifies relevant information and provides it through the appropriate process. Then Jennifer asks, "So they'll change the appraisal?" Sarah says, "There's no guarantee." Exactly. An ROV is not a magic raise the appraisal button. The information may be reviewed, but Sarah should not promise the conclusion will change. Several days later, the lender's review is completed. The value remains $605,000. Now the parties have a decision to make. Mike initially refuses to reduce the price. David doesn't want to cover the entire difference. Sarah and Daniel begin communicating possible solutions according to their client's instructions. Eventually, they find one. The Reynolds agree to a negotiated adjustment, and David agrees to contribute additional funds, within the structure permitted by his financing and contract. The parties document the agreed change appropriately. Sarah updates the seller net estimate so Mike and Jennifer can see how the revised terms may affect their anticipated proceeds. Notice what Sarah did not do. She didn't guarantee David's financing. She didn't guarantee the appraisal would change. She didn't order Mike to reduce the price. She didn't tell David how much additional cash he had to bring. She helped her seller understand the issue, reviewed the transaction terms, communicated with the other side, provided relevant information, and documented the parties' agreement. That's transaction management. Now Mike asks the question every seller eventually asks, "Are we finally done?" Sarah laughs. Almost. The agreed inspection repairs still need to be completed. David will have an opportunity to conduct his final walkthrough according to the contract. The lender is preparing final loan documents. Closing figures need to come together. David will receive his closing disclosure as applicable. Mike and Jennifer need to sign their documents. And here's one more Arizona real estate lesson that sellers sometimes don't understand. Signing isn't necessarily closing. Funding matters. Recording matters. Possession matters. The keys shouldn't simply change hands because everyone walked out of the title office smiling. That's where we'll go in Section 20, the final stretch. Walkthrough, closing disclosure, signing, funding, recording, and possession. Online discussion 1. The appraisal comes in at $605,000, while the Reynolds are under contract at $615,000. Does the appraisal automatically change the contract price to $605,000? Answer: no. The appraisal is a separate valuation conclusion and does not automatically rewrite the parties' purchase agreement. The parties and their agents should review the financing and appraisal provisions of the actual contract, lender requirements, and available options before determining how the appraisal issue will be addressed. 2. Mike wants Sarah to call the appraiser and demand that the value be increased. What should Sarah do? Answer: Sarah should avoid attempting to coerce or improperly influence the appraiser. She may assist with identifying accurate factual information, relevant market data, or potential errors through an appropriate lender or reconsideration process. But the goal should be an accurate appraisal rather than forcing the appraiser to reach the contract price. 3. Sarah finds a $640,000 sale that Jennifer once submitted for reconsideration. Should Sarah automatically use it because it has a higher price? Answer: no. Sarah should consider whether the property is actually relevant to the valuation issue. Differences in size, condition, features, location, lot characteristics, transaction date, and other factors may affect its usefulness. Providing relevant and accurate market information is more appropriate than simply selecting the highest price sale available.